advertising that is not strictly speaking informative, and I would say a lot of advertising contains some information about a product, but in general, it functions on bases that are not conscious. In other words, there's no reason in the world that the attractive model sitting in the passenger seat of the fancy car should persuade you to think differently about how good a car it is, or
Even if she comes with the car.
that's the thing, is they never do.
Yeah.
So you should not have your sense of value of that car or your need for it or anything else altered by the fact that the company who's selling the car has hired somebody attractive and put them in the seat of the car. And if anything, you should think, well, the car is going to be somewhat more expensive because they're investing in persuading me on a sexual channel that I need this machine, right? So the point is, we know that this works because advertising is well studied, and people pay billions of dollars, in the aggregate to be selling all kinds of things. They're basically persuading you of things on unconscious channels. So here's the question. If you link advertising to journalism, right? Journalism that does get your attention, but wakes up your conscious mind because it challenges what you think, may not be a very good match for advertising. Right? You may not be so persuaded by the attractive model in the car if you're in your conscious mind, because your conscious mind is smarter than that, right? And so the question is there an evolutionary tendency, as we have used advertising to fuel journalism? And, this has always been there. There's always been a kind of hegemony of the advertisers over the content of the newspaper, and that's always been a problem. But at the moment, so much of our world is being driven by advertising, appended to everything, that anything that properly tunes in to lulling people into that sense of calm that makes them, just even think about the way the internet works, right? Advertisers are paying based on clicks. That means they're paying based on how effective their ads were. So any ad that was depending on persuading you of something on an emotional channel that is unconscious is going to discover, when it works, that you click more. What if it's true that journalism that wakes people up and causes them to think, oh, geez, I didn't realize that, right? What if that kind of journalism causes people to click less on the emotional ads that are spread around the page, and so it goes extinct,
Yes.
Or it gets driven to Substack or whatever happens to it. And then the point is, the mainstream just becomes a reflection of your biases and your predispositions, because that puts you in a buying mood, right? That's the point. Is it the advertising? It's not that we wouldn't read the stuff that would challenge us and make us smarter. It's that doesn't work from the point of view of the economics of the journalistic establishments.
That's excellent. And it's a really different model than the one that anyone who's thought deeply about advertising, how it has affected content in the past, has looked. So I'm thinking specifically, just because it's something I did research on a long, long time ago, I know particularly how advertisers have been able to, at least in the past, specifically drive content in so-called women's literature, women's magazines, and actually decide not just what page, what so-called editorial content is opposite their ad, but also what that content says, which means, makes the entire magazine effectively an advertisement. There is nothing that is ad-free content in a magazine, even when you're reading something that is supposedly a feature or something. And that is a model that is heinous and has been much decried and all of this. And it's also really easy to understand. Right? Like you can get there without thinking very hard about it, and you can wonder if it's still happening, and you can suspect that there's some covert stuff. But it's just like, that's a model that is encapsulated within that story. This is different. It's a little harder to grok. You gotta sort of spend some time with what the implications are and why it would be evolving this way, and why it might not have been noticed by those who would be trying to be paying attention to the metrics in the first place.
Yeah, and I wonder, it's the kind of thing that might be worth talking to Gad Saad about. His
I was just thinking this is exactly his expertise.
Yeah, but. Anyway, I think it's an interesting question. There are a lot of places it goes. Unfortunately, I don't have the tweet. Something came up in a discussion that I was party to, and it reminded me of a hypothesis I advanced many years ago, 95, I believe. So there was a tweet that somebody was showing in a conversation that I'm part of, and the tweet argued that porn is actually because it's male biased, because it's targeted at men, and it sexualizes women in a particular way, it is actually causing women to imagine that they are lesbian, even though they prefer having sex with and the company of men in romantic context. So what I advanced in 95 was not about porn at all, because of course porn was, it's existed, it's as old as the hills, but it wasn't accessible and as ubiquitous and normalized and all of that stuff as it is now. And so anyway, my nearby hypothesis was that in fact it wasn't porn, but that it was advertising, because males are so driven by female sexuality, right? The advertisers have honed in on it, right? Sex sells, and typically that means, the male version of it, right? Because it makes men impulsive and all of that. So the hypothesis that I advanced was that that basically women were being sold, as sex was being used to sell products, right? That inadvertently the male view of sex was being sold to everybody, including women, and that women were in fact finding themselves lustful towards other women because basically, irresistibly desirable images of women were being, constantly broadcast at everybody. So I don't know whether this is right or wrong.
Yeah, and it's consistent though.
Whether the porn has greatly amplified some parallel thing, but this is also someplace that would be worth paying attention to.
Indeed.
All right.
Is that it?
That's it from my perspective.
All right.